Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session 6 on the Knowledge Equity and Open Scholarship Week 2026. My name's Dominic Broadhurst, and I'm the panel chair today for this session, and I work at the University of Salford in the UK. Once you're coming into the chat, if you want to say hello and just put where you're from, that'd be really great. And then people can see, we're really expecting a global audience today. So, feel free to put your details in the chat and just say hello, where you're from and what you do, etc. That'd be really great. Okay, so thank you. So today's session is on how can we shape equitable open access for long-form scholarships. And we've got some great speakers and a great panel. And we'll introduce you before the session. But Tom, if you could just move to the next slide, please. So as part of this, so welcome to the Knowledge Equity and Scholarship Week 2026. This programme has been developed collaboratively by colleagues from a number of universities in Algeria, Tunisia, South Africa, UK and Holland. And there are 7 sessions in total covering various aspects relating to knowledge equity and open scholarships. As you all know, we're on Thursday now on how can we shape equitable open access for long-form scholarships. And we're really looking forward to, talking to you about that today and getting all your valuable inputs as well. There is another session this afternoon, which is around co-creation and experiment, reflecting on the experiment and how we've done this session. And you can sign up for that as well if you're not already by using one of the QR codes below. These co-creation has been really valuable. We've asked colleagues from across the world to work together, and there's a number, and you can see all the outputs. They've co-created a number of outputs, and you can see these on the Ken website, which I think someone will put in the chat as well. Okay, thank you. Tom, if you could just move on. So just a couple of housekeeping. So just to talk about the code of conduct, the Ken, the Knowledge Equity Network, we're really around diverse perspectives. And we just ask that everyone here engages with kindness and professionalism, both in the chat and in comments as well. I'm sure that won't be an issue, but, we just think it's useful to sort of, talk the talk and say what we're all about, basically. Okay, so we move to today's session, and we're really pleased to sort of present this session. It's all around open access for long-form scholarship, which in other words are books, basically. And long-form publications remain central to, how knowledge is developed, especially in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. Yet, open access, it continues to lag behind journals in this respect. And why is this, and what do we need to change it, really? So earlier this year, the Knowledge Equity Network commissioned some global research from Information Power to provide a report on long-form publishing. And this session is really to look at that report and some of the outputs from it, and to create a discussion regarding the issues that came about within it, really. The session looks to explore the structural, cultural and economic factors shaping progress across different regions and contexts. And I think one of the most valuable aspects of this report is that it pulled together the viewpoints and perspectives from a range of different countries. So a lot of the time around OA long form, it centres on sort of UK and Western models. And this report looked at a number of, case studies in a range of countries relating to the Knowledge Equity Network membership. So we brought together these perspectives, and this session really invites you all as participants to reflect on how long-form publishing can move from the margins to become a core part of a more equitable and connected open scholarship ecosystem. And just so what will happen now is that I just wanted to introduce you to the panel. So what we have a really great panel from across the Knowledge Equity Network membership, and who are heavily involved in the project for this report. So firstly, we've got Alicia Wise, who's a Director of Information Power, and Alicia will provide a presentation on the report and some of the outcomes. Then the panel is also made up by my esteemed colleagues, Pimpin Yeo, who's Head of Research Services at Singapore Management University. And we've got Lindiwe Soyizwapi, who's Director of Library Services at the University of Pretoria. And then we've also got Tom Grady, who's the OA Books Advisor at Copim. And then myself, Head of Content and Discovery, University of Salford, Dominic, who'll be chairing the panel. So how the session is going to run is Alicia is going to do a presentation on the report itself and some of the findings. Then following that, I'm going to ask my panelists to sort of reflect on their own experiences of OA Longform in each of their countries specifically. And then we're going to have a chat and a question and answer session. And we do ask people just to put questions in the chat, and we'll try and manage as many of those questions as we can, basically. So feel free during the course of Alicia's presentation to put some comments in, or as we speak, but put those questions in the chat, and then we'll manage that, and we'll hope to have a really engaging and fruitful discussion, taking into account all the knowledge that is in this room at the moment. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to transfer now to Alicia, who is going to provide the presentation for the first part of the session.
Thank you so much, Dominic. And welcome, everybody. I'm going to present the report as quickly as possible because the really interesting thing here will be the discussion with the panelists and participants today. So the report that I'm going to be telling you about was commissioned by the Knowledge Equity Network and the University of Leeds. It's called Open Access Long-Form Publication Impact Research Project, and it's available in the ePrints repository at the White Rose Press. So the URL is here, and it's also on the final slide in case you don't have a chance to capture it right now, or you're not yet interested. Hopefully we will interest you by the end. So quickly, the team that did this work, we are international. We're a team of open access consultants based in Finland, Greece, and the UK, but that is not nearly international enough when we think about open access. And the opportunity to work with the Knowledge Equity Network was absolutely brilliant. We all started with information about what was happening on open access books around the world, and we learned an awful lot. And part of that is because we were focused on the Knowledge Equity Network partner countries. We started by doing desk research, a bibliographic review. And what became really obvious very quickly is that there's a huge bias toward what is happening in Europe and North America when you query the library and information science literature. So we can form a view from that kind of formalized publications, but it was really the semi-structured interviews and the focus groups with representatives from the Knowledge Equity Network partner countries, which really brought this story to life. And we learned so much from talking to colleagues around the world. We're really privileged to be able to do so. So thank you all very much indeed. Quickly, the project ran from September of last year to February. And this is the first time we're presenting an overview of the report, and keen to get feedback and thoughts. And I don't know what I was thinking. Who wants to look at the table of contents for a report on a slide? But here you go. It just gives you a sense of how to dip into it if you're interested. There's a short executive summary if you are pressed for time. But the real interesting things here, I think, are some quantitative analyses of current and future trends in open access book publishing. How many books are being published now and which are open access? We'll come back to that. And then the case studies, a real snapshot overview of every single Knowledge Equity Network partner. And I'll give you a flavor for those, but they're really quite rich and detailed and fascinating in their similarities and differences. So I'd encourage you to pluck those up if you have a chance. All right, so our key findings were that open access is a live issue in all of the Knowledge Equity Network partner countries. But when you start focusing in on open access books, long form outputs, the picture is different. One of the fascinating things we learned was that definitions of what was considered in scope when you talk about OA books really varied. In the UK, we think about monographs and edited collections or book chapters. But in other of the partner countries, people were more focused on OERs, open textbooks, and other educational resources. Or they were thinking about dissertations and theses, learning materials of other kinds, even in one case, musical works as text that needed to be opened. In all of the countries, I think it's fair to say that long form open access is supported in principle, it's valued in principle, but it's not prioritized. And that's true, I think, for all stakeholders, funders, libraries, and even academics in terms of promotion and tenure systems. OA for journals is underway everywhere. The picture is more varied for open access books. Some countries not yet begun that journey, and others having taken baby steps down that road. Funding was the consistent challenge for all participants. At best, the funding picture was fragmented, insufficient, or perhaps misaligned with costs and working practices. Lots of room for improvement and good reasons to make those improvements. At the other end of the spectrum, also fascinating, sometimes there were very strong mandates requiring books to be and journals to be open access, but without any funding whatsoever. And the expressions in practice of how works are made open access really vary depending on what that funding landscape looks like. But most countries were somewhere in the middle with some but not enough open access money for journals and almost none at all for books. And that is a key challenge. Policies for open access books are lagging behind journals or just mimic the journal policies, which isn't really appropriate given the very different landscape and stakeholders and workflows around book acquisition and publishing. Prestige and reward systems are crucial because they drive author choices in where and how to publish, and clearly they are not yet prioritizing open access long form. And shared infrastructure emerges again and again as a critical enabling tool. It's crucial for lowering the costs of OA book publishing and enabling new competitors, such as library presses, to enter the market. So we did some projections based on current publishing practices, and we looked at data from 2024, and we projected forward to 2030 based on the idea that nothing would change, just current trends, what will happen in the OA long form space. We think the number of academic books will grow from around 110,000 a year to 145,000, so there'll be continued volume growth. All of the models will increase gradually, but the takeaway here is that at the moment, fewer than 1 in 5 academic books is available open access, and that looks unlikely to change by 2030 unless there are changes in our practices and behaviors. So that's the challenge here. How to actually decide how quickly to grow and what the changes are necessary to get us to that objective. I should perhaps also say something quickly about data. The data is parlous. It's terrible around open access books. It is incredibly difficult to figure out the number of total books published, which of those are academic books, and which of those are open access in the different models. So in this study, we've used data drawn from Unpaywall and the free version of the Dimensions database. We've done our best with the publicly available information, but more attention to actually having the bibliographic information and the infrastructure to just track what book publishing practices there are and how those are changing over time is a key area for focus. Okay, our recommendations. In some ways, they're high level. We are at an early stage of long form open access publishing, so there's a lot of need for international coordination, and the Knowledge Equity Network might play a really interesting role here. There needs to be specific policy frameworks, investments, engagement with academics, and a reform of those systems, and strengthen infrastructure and capacity. No surprises, I think, there in the high-level recommendations. But what did come through clearly is that with deliberate strategic alignment and sustained collective investment, long-form open access can move from the margins to become a central component in scholarly communications, and it could be a more inclusive and sustainable community as well. However, long-form open access will not scale through isolated pilots, short-term funding, or applying journal-centric models to books. We need to really have a fresh and specific approach here. And a key challenge will be winning the hearts and minds of our academic colleagues. And we think it unlikely that open access long form will succeed by asserting the quality and prestige of open access publishing options without building trust and the confidence of those academic colleagues. And this seems to be a challenge right around the world, just as funding is. Okay, let's give a little overview. This chart presents data drawn from the COKI database, the Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative, which assigns publications to countries based on their author affiliations. So say you had a book, or in this case, journal as well, a book with multiple authors. Each country where one of the authors is affiliated would be counted in these counts. And what we were very interested by is that the top 3 countries in the Knowledge Equity Network by percentage of open access publications, books and journals overall, were Kenya, Argentina, and the Philippines, which is really powerful. Another way of looking at these data is to think about the total proportion, or the total number of outputs. And here you can see quite an interesting picture as well. Those countries with the highest proportion of total outputs being open access actually have perhaps a modest number of total outputs in general. And countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and the UK, with a very large number of outputs where you can get a lot of change in the total percentage being made open access, well, that's a big lift because there are an awful lot of books and journal articles and so forth being produced. All right, let me give you just a flavor for about just a few minutes on what we learned about the different countries. And we did think this COKI data was important from an equity perspective, recognizing the European and North American bias in the literature. We wanted to really convey that open access is a live issue in every single one of the Knowledge Equity Network partner countries. Whether or not open access books are very actively being delivered at this point in time. So everybody is making huge contributions to the global transition to open access. Argentina was quite interesting, and I think we learned a lot here. They have a strong national mandate for green open access, and they also provide very little funding to institutions to implement that mandate, very little at all, which has driven quite a lot of interesting collaboration in providing repository infrastructure. And it's also led, interestingly, to quite a lot of diamond open access publishing. So a lot of national funding can be directed at supporting local and local language publishers, and those works are born open access from the very beginning. Germany, one of perhaps the leading countries in Europe, along with the Netherlands and the UK, in this journey to long-form open access, different again. Long-form OA is uneven due to the federal structure. Each region has a different policy and strategy, and in any large country, you would expect to see that kind of variation. But here, that fragmentation means that progress is different. This shows a countrywide level, but the picture is very different if you dig down a little bit deeper. But research funders and university policies are all aligned. They're all signaling that open access for long-form outputs is wanted and desired. And they're beginning to really work through the details about how to scale that up in practice. What are the funding flows that need to change? Um, how can they change the recognition system to prioritize the value of open access publishing for academics to increase the global visibility of German research? Kenya, no policy or funding for either books or journals in the open access space, but huge progress being made on the journal front only. We didn't find much evidence for open access books at all. Um, but interestingly, there's an equity challenge here. What we were hearing from our Kenyan participants was that a lot of the open access publishing is only possible because they are partnering with international researchers who can afford APCs or BPCs. The lack of financial support is a real structural challenge and issue here. The Netherlands, my subjective view, perhaps the farthest ahead on open access long form and a place to look for interesting models and leadership. Their national funding agency has a clear mandate requiring open access for monographs. It provides up to 10,000 euros in funding for books, though that doesn't cover the full publication costs. Interestingly, there's a national strategy really for focusing on diamond open access capacity expansion and funding. And they provide national funding for a suite of publishing tools that library and new university presses bring scholarship out into the open in a really affordable and cost-effective way. New Zealand, also active here, a successful track record in open access for journals, but no national funding or focus, particularly for a growing long form at this point. And the sense was that they were watching the international landscape and looking to learn from the experiences in other countries. The Philippines, different again. See, you can see how fascinating this project was. It was really interesting. The Philippines has no national open access policy for either books or journals, and is perhaps more focused on digitization, giving books a second life by bringing them online. So the digital transition still very much active and playing a role here. Pinpin, our expert on the panel, is from Singapore and can talk far more effectively about their experiences than I can. And same thing with Lindiwe from South Africa. So I won't say too much about either of those important countries, but I'll finish with Tunisia very quickly. Here again, fascinating. Open access generally is in a very early stage of development. Long form OA is not on the agenda at all yet. Efforts focus more on journals and open educational resources. And there's a distrust of open access generally, particularly in journals, because of predatory publishing and also the number of retractions and concerns again about not the principle of open access, but some of the practices of some of the players in this space, which is a perception to recognize. And in the UK, I'm going to leave this for Tom, who is an expert in this area and will be able to bring the entire landscape to life through his experiences with Copim and elsewhere. So once again, here's the URL for the full report. I hope you will be able to dive into it. Those case studies are really, really interesting and fascinating. And Dominic, back over to you. Really looking forward to learning from the conversation today.
Thank you, Alicia. And yes, I think just to reiterate, if you get a chance, do read the report. It's available, of course, open access, as you'd hope for. And, you know, the link is in the chat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to ask my colleagues from the panel just to talk about their experiences and their knowledge from their own particular regions. As I said, all these three countries, UK, Singapore and South Africa, are included in the report. So firstly, Lindiwe, if I could come to you, please, and just to provide some comment and some thoughts around the issue for long form OA in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Good day, everybody. Just representing just a broad overview of what's happening in South Africa regarding long form. I think to start off with, I'll say there isn't a national mandate for long form in South Africa, but there is greater adoption of open access publishing. I think the benefits of making research available to citizens within our country, for making research available to a global audience. And I think also because of our environments in academia, hopefully it also results in increased citations. But, you know, referring to what Alicia has also mentioned, the experience within South Africa by our researchers, it's the exorbitant fees in publishing open access, whether it's for articles or it's for open books. Within our environment also, there's that risk of predatory publishing. You know, researchers are always wanting to check, you know, is this a reputable publisher? Have you ever heard of this publisher? And also the whole concern around loss of rights, you know, handing over your copyright. So I think during the week, we've had speakers who've shared with us about how as libraries we continue to subscribe to the options that are giving us opportunities for these read and publish or transformative agreements. But we're finding that although a number of these publishers also publish open books, the publishing option of these subscription is only still limited to publishing articles. It hasn't been extended to publishing books. So for South Africa, and I suppose for some of our partners in the Global South, publishing open, whether it's article or it's books, I think we're faced with the currency fluctuations that has an additional affordability challenge for our participation. So it is also, as it has been said during the week, about broadening access for people to read, but it's also about participation that our researchers can also afford to actually publish. So in South Africa, I think I want to also make reference to just greater openness to publishing open, although it started initially with the STEM fields within universities, but there's been greater adoption across all disciplines. We've also seen the growth of institutional repositories starting in the 2000s, starting also with just the theses and articles, but it has grown to also having books on our repositories. But I also want to say that most of the books that we've got as collections on our repositories are not born digital, but it has been work that has been digitized just to enhance visibility. So maybe I just want to make reference also, as libraries become taking leadership and ownership of institutional repositories, we also are increasingly needing to have IT expertise within our teams and also greater collaboration with IT departments, because we also have to be mindful of security and cybersecurity in particular. So across South Africa, we also are aware that there's a number of scholarly presses and university presses that a lot of scholars also use. But we're also mindful that publishing using a university press does not mean you're publishing an open book. You can still just publish as previously. It can remain like a closed book, not an open book. So at the University of Pretoria, we also have two open monograph platforms. One is referred to as Emerging Scholars Initiative, which the Faculty of Humanities is responsible for, and then the law press as well. I think also what we are aware of is that if mandates or requirements come from the Department of Higher Education and Training in terms of supporting research subsidies for what's published. So we do also have policies that allow for publication of books or chapters in books, but it doesn't necessarily express or support open books necessarily. It's still just the normal way of publishing books, but there is policy around funding and subsidies for publishing books within the country. I think the National Research Foundation was the first to actually have a mandate on open access, but also it does not include publishing long form books within that mandate of the NRF, which came out in 2015. So maybe just to end off with just a bit of good news that in March 2026, we now have a national science policy within South Africa, which has been long awaited, and we're trusting with this policy and regulatory environment, it will encourage also the open long form publications. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lindiwe. Really interesting, really thoughtful comments. It was really, and it was always nice to end on a bit of good news as well, really. But it was interesting. I think, you referred to it, and this is something maybe we could put in the chat and discuss further. I think one of the issues around long form is that libraries and scholars and all of those involved are really keen not to make the mistakes that have potentially happened in the journal space. While transformative agreements are fantastic in many areas, they also require a lot of funding and also, they sort of perpetuate the inequalities. So, but yeah, thank you. That was really interesting. And I'm going to now pass you over to Pimpin, who's going to give the perspective from Singapore. Pimpin.
Hello. So in Singapore, we have a research environment that is shaped so much by funder requirements and individual university performance metrics. So both of these just prioritize short form publications. So grants normally just your grant period is quite short, maybe 2 years, maybe can be extended, but it doesn't really encourage the principal investigators to really devote time to creating long form publications. So it does show up in the fact that Singapore publishes more in journal articles and conference proceedings, but not so much in books. But I was looking for some glimmers of good news also. So I found 3 wonderful examples of long form publications which are open access. So we have one of our SMU faculty collaborated with other professors to actually put out their international trade casebook on a platform and made it open so that students are not constrained by the high cost of law textbooks. So I applaud their effort to do this. And they've done this on the Geneva Trade platform. So they have their international trade casebook out there available for anyone to look at. And they do recognize the advantage of having an open education resource that it's something they can update easily. They can include more different objects inside instead of a printed book. So they had flexibility that way. And the effect of that's no cost to the students. And another example I have is one of our faculty who works with the European Foundation for Management Development. So they actually publish their books all with Routledge, but they make it open access because they want to share all the work that they have done on business school research. So again, It's funded by a European Foundation for Management Development. And the last one I have is actually local to Singapore. It is a book on infectious disease emergencies that was published by NUS Press together with the NUS School of Medicine. So when COVID happened, everybody scrambled. They didn't know how to handle such pandemics. So after the pandemic was over, actually one of the authors was approached by his students to say we should write how this kind of situation should be handled. And they did it. And they had generous support from the NUS School of Medicine. So I think this one was a compelling reason for them to make their book open access. And would this be a way? And I think one of the questions was, did you see any examples where actually this was the scholars and educators who led the adoption of OA long form? So I guess this is like one of the examples compelled by COVID-19. But certainly, I think they saw that there's a value to share this book, open access, and it will not just be useful for the medicine people, but public health policy makers could benefit from this book being open access. So I'd like to end there on that positive note.
You, Pimpin, yeah, very interesting, I think, and it was great to hear those examples. I think, firstly, when you talk about the barriers, there's something that resonates across all of this, and this is something that came out of Alicia's research, and this is something, how do we as a community, try and alleviate those barriers? I thought it was also interesting that the examples you gave, and again, when we talk about OA long form, and the differences between and the similarities between open educational resources, at the end of the day, it's an open access form of a long form publication. I think there's some opportunities there because OERs are often student led or teaching led, which provides sort of incentives for academics to get involved and to make that publication available. So, yeah, I think that is something that we as a community need to think about as well. Thank you. Tom, I'll now pass you over to you, please, if you'd like to just give your commentary. Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. So I think InfoPower did a great job of drawing together a good summary in the report of the UK picture. So I'd urge anyone interested in that particular context to read the whole thing. I'm just going to highlight in particular a couple of points from the report and expand on those briefly with my own observations. So first of all, the report notes that many scholars think about open access late in the publication process, often after signing contracts. I think that finding means we still have some work to do on getting ECRs on board with OA earlier in their career. In fact, I think that could be crucial, and I'd be happy to expand on that later. The report also mentions that even the wealthiest institutions in the UK struggle with funding. Research-intensive universities are better resourced than teaching-intensive institutions, and they're all struggling. I agree that's a challenge for everyone, particularly in the UK with we've seen in the news pretty much every day another higher education institution going through cuts and redundancies. We're also seeing it in the USA for different reasons as well, different and related reasons. And given what Alicia mentioned in her overview, that the US and the UK dominate quite a lot of open access books discourse, we should probably watch this very carefully because they're both in financial trouble in terms of universities. I can only see it getting worse before it gets better. Sorry, that'd be a positive one there. The report also notes that discovery challenges remain a problem, which is a problem for everyone. And this is where myself and my colleagues on the Copim project would love to see much wider adoption of the tote metadata service. If you're not aware of what tote is, it's a fantastic platform that goes a long way to trying to stop the mangling of open access metadata. So Paula Kennedy spoke the other day on a webinar, mentioned that her press, the University of London Press, produces beautiful open access metadata for their books. But by the time it's surfaced in library catalogues, it's gone through third-party aggregation and so forth. And she said it's almost unrecognizable metadata. So that pipeline in between isn't working for open access books. Tote metadata goes a long way in resolving that. So we'd love to see much wider adoption of that. Report also mentions diamond programs, services and publishers in the UK being very much part of the conversation. And I'd emphasize that what we're seeing is a real patchwork of these blossoming that collectively are beginning to offer a credible route to OA for authors and a route to compliance for institutions for our policies and funders and mandates that we have in the UK. I do think we just need to bolster this capacity. We need to bolster this growing diamond ecosystem and stitch that patchwork together more comprehensively. Happy to talk more about that as well. And finally, I'll just mention that the report highlights the lack of a national strategy for OA books in the UK, which I am increasingly beginning to think is crucial because we can't keep doing this piecemeal with the burden being on individual libraries to find the programs and to find the money to support revenue models like Opening the Future, which I was involved with, and the Open Book Collective, which also launched out of Copim. Individual libraries are finding and supporting them where they can. Those programs are there, they're ready, they're proven so far. And I'm inclined to think we now need a coordinated approach at national level to financially supporting them and others like them in order to sustain a bibliodiverse ecosystem. I think that's probably my summary of the UK picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I just sort of echo a couple of Tom's sort of things there. Firstly, if any of those colleagues outside of the UK are unfamiliar with the work that Copim does, I'd definitely get you to look into it. They do a fantastic job and they've really moved sort of the OA sort of monograph long form forward in the UK, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that, long-term strategy, a proper strategy is something, because I think there's a lot of will there across UK institutions and I'm sure across other institutions in the world. But, in terms of how do we pull all this together? And finally, a question around discoverability. We want people to use these OA books, but they need to find them and to show their value and their worth. And obviously with being OA, it's a slightly different type of scenario from other sort of areas. So the metadata angle is, you'd expect that as a librarian for me to bang on about metadata, but it's absolutely true. It's really critical with OA books. So thank you for all, Tom, Pimpin and Lindiwe. I think that was really insightful and just really interesting as well to get those different perspectives. I think there's a lot of similarities. We've got issues and opportunities, but there's also some national sort of circumstances as well. And I think Tom just alluded to the situation in the UK, which we know that UK higher education is in sort of financial difficulties. But I think the question for OA monographs is a lot more around the financial benefits that it offers as well to UKHE. And I think we need to make a bit more of a business case around that as well, really. So I'm just going to have a look in the chat and open it up for questions. So let me have a look. So I'm just going to. There's one from Tanya, who's a colleague of mine, and I just put that one forward first. Did the research reveal any countries where scholars and educators drive the adoption of OA long form? And I think the issue for there is that probably often it's always driven by libraries a lot of the time, etc. So are there any instances in there? And I think Pimpin, you potentially mentioned a couple of areas around COVID and on the OER side, and maybe that's more scholar-led, but maybe that's a question for you, Alicia, first. And if anyone in the other panel will comment on how do we, if it isn't scholar-led, how do we try and ensure it to be scholar-led?
Yeah, so that wasn't a major trend anywhere. There were examples in all countries of scholar-led book publishing, and there's some hotspots where you got real champions. People like Martin Eve are mentioned, and his influence on presses in the United States and the UK are mentioned. But those are unusual bright spots rather than the norm, I would say.
And maybe if I open to the panel, how would we encourage scholars to get involved in OA long form? What's your thoughts on that, really, to try and drive it rather than always being library led?
Dominic. Okay. So I'm thinking, I think the one thing that comes to mind in our environment when people are thinking of publishing open books, it's cost, which is prohibitive. So if there's greater adoption of models like Diamond or of local presses where open monographs can be published, I think it's a great opportunity for those platforms to actually be led by researchers and also scholars. In our environment, for instance, I spoke of the open monographs and the law press, which are actually driven by faculties. The one on open monographs, it's a partnership between Humanities and the library, but they are driving the publishing of open books.
Thank you, Lindiwe. Tom or Pimpin, have you got any thoughts on how we can get academics to drive, academic colleagues to drive the move to OA long form?
Could sort of answer that tangentially, if I may. And that's to say that according to the UCU, which is the University and Colleges Union in the UK, 64% of early career researchers in the UK are on short-term contracts, precarious contracts. So the current form of publishing isn't actually supporting those ECRs to remain in academia and to publish. That, you know, we tell them to publish or perish. We tell them they've got to publish in the prestigious locations. It's not serving them. If they're still on precarious contracts, it's not serving them. So I'm not sure I'm actually answering your question, but I do think this is a related point, is to say that we need to be much more imaginative in talking to our ECRs about where to publish, because the old ways from 20 years ago aren't working. So why don't we push them towards the new ways?
I think that's a valid point in terms of ECR, because as we know, publishing a long form publication takes a lot longer than publishing a journal article, and it can be a 2 to 3 or 4 year process. And if there's insecurity of employment, that's going to be a barrier for it. Pimpin, have you got any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think if the faculty sees the benefit of publishing an open access long form, they might be more encouraged to do it. But I tend to see that it's the more established professors who will do this more. The young upcoming faculty are less likely to take this route, because when they are up for evaluation, for appraisal, having a long form open access book may not be so advantageous. Citations to books are not easy to get, and especially if you publish a textbook, no, another academic is not going to cite your textbook. But you can show usage.
Yeah.
So it is a tough world for the younger academics to move towards this area. So they have to be more established before they can think, okay, I'll share my book open access.
Yeah, I think that's really, I mean, that links in a little bit to Tom's point around the whole sort of structures around academia as well, and, you know, the impact on long form as well. Alicia?
Dominic, we're doing a project right now for Research Libraries UK, Scannell and Arma on long form books. And something that's emerged really strongly from the focus groups for that new project, it's around this early career researchers point. And actually there's a funding gap that's specific to them. So they're where they have funding for their PhD research. There's not necessarily funding to enable them to go on to publish a book. They are on short-term, perhaps teaching contracts if they even stay in academia. And those sorts of contracts don't come with support for book publishing. And yet they need a book published oftentimes to get a tenure track position. And so they're likely to be taking guidance from more senior academic colleagues. They're likely to be really looking at more traditional book publishers to get that book deal through. And it might be that some concerted funding to support them to bridge this gap, to publish their first book in an open access form in a way that's affordable and scalable for libraries, could be a very powerful a transition mechanism. Just something to think about.
Thanks, Alicia. Okay. I'm going to take a question in the chat here from Sally Dalton. I think works at the University of Leeds. She says, open question the funder open monograph grants are denying compliance with OA books, for example, in the UK, the UKRI, UK Research and Innovation. But how do we reinforce in a model where open access for books depends on paying large book processing costs to commercial publishers, which is, I think, is one of the issues where we got in the journal space. So I suppose is how do we avoid and what other funding models are available, really? So anyone who wants to take that question first? So I suppose the issue is how do we avoid paying large BPCs as to major commercial publishers, and we end up in the situation whereby open access is either very expensive and still in the hands of the commercial publishers.
Get behind Diamond. I mean, that sounds a bit glib, but that's what it boils down to for me. Unless we can see sustained investment in Diamond infrastructures, Diamond publishers, Diamond publishing outlets, then the big commercial entities are going to swoop in and solve this problem for us. And libraries are going to find it's too late, that they're suddenly locked into some kind of read and publish deal or whatever it'll be. I'm thinking about currently in the UK, we still have a ref mandate coming up on January the 1st, 2029. Any outputs published after that will have to be open access, long form. Now, they may row back on that, but let's say they don't. That's not that far away if I was writing a book right now. So publishers, authors, and libraries need to be thinking about this right now. And we need to be agitating for more support for Diamond, because the fallback is going to be BPCs through, I won't say any commercial names, but we all know who they are. And that is not financially possible. There's not enough money in the system to do it.
Thanks, Tom. Lindiwe, I think you mentioned are there some sort of initiatives for Diamond taking place in South Africa as well now then? How's that shaping?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking, I want to start off by saying also, it's important for universities to just look at the evaluation that's in place for authors. Because if evaluation links to issues of prestige, links to issues of publishing with particular types of publishers, then it actually means the behavior of researchers is going to follow what the criteria is for evaluation. So if the criteria is open to diamond platforms where people have published open books, if they would get the same recognition, acknowledgement within the institution, then it's likely to drive behavior to people being open. Because when you think about it, in terms of the expertise of peer review, of editorial services that commercial companies are using, commercial publishers are using, it's actually a lot of the expertise that resides within institutions. So if institutions would just review the policies and mandates and support Diamond and support local as well. Thank you.
Pimpin, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
I would say for Singapore, that's kind of not so possible in the short term, because we are so tied to having to report to our Ministry of Education. How many publications do we have? How many citations did those publications get? Although we're trying to widen the conversation to cover impact, not just count academic citations, but I guess we are still a long way from going there.
Thank you. So I think we've got about 5 minutes left. I think we've got time for one quick question, really. And I think, Pimpin, this follows on from your comments about the COVID response and the book that was produced with that. So the question is, how might the differing cultures and funding models and publishing projects of science, STEM subjects and arts and humanities disciplines shape the case for open access? And in terms of supporting long form scholarship and public knowledge dissemination for the public good. So I suppose I'm saying is, moving outside the academic space, how can long form publications help the wider public good, and how much could that be an impact?
I guess Singapore hasn't really studied that, and funding goes to more novel, innovative projects that, yes, are more STEM-based. In Singapore, we do have specific funding for social sciences, but they tend to be smaller amounts compared to STEM
I think that,
funding.
thank you. I think the question is also about, because obviously, how can OA long form be used for the public good as opposed to just academic purposes? And I think we've talked about OERs, for example, and I don't know, how do we leverage that potentially? And I don't know whether that came out of the research at all, Alicia, the wider good of OA in terms of the public dissemination of knowledge.
It did, absolutely. There are public good advantages to open access dissemination of every kind, and I expect everyone on this call would agree with that. However, to support what Pinpin was saying, what also comes through is that there's an environment where, in the humanities and social sciences in particular, jobs are scarce for early career researchers. Funding is scarce for established researchers and research departments. These subject areas are facing cuts around the world, and there's a sense of needing to defend the existence of these communities of practice, of these departments. And so if you're making a publishing decision and you're thinking the public good is on the side of open access, but perhaps the pragmatics of getting that job, of keeping my funding flowing, pushes you toward more traditional publishing, I'm afraid the scales might tip in a direction that won't advance open access long form as much and as quickly as any of us would like. Oh, but you want a positive ending there, Dominic. You're going to need to find somebody else because that was not. But I'm afraid that's what it feels like in a pragmatic sense.
I was wondering, Lindiwe, in South Africa, the sort of issues around OA and OA long form in terms of the public good and, the benefits to wider society as opposed to just academia. Has there been a discussion about that? Or has there been any work towards that as well, in terms of health or STEM, the example that Pimpin gave around COVID?
So I'm just thinking, not because there's an example at the moment, but I'm thinking with the open monograph platforms that are available, and with libraries also working closer with communities, it's possible to actually create collections and to create space for authors from the community as well to actually have a platform for publishing, whether it's fiction, whether it's poetry, but then you have a collection that is exclusively there for it to be just an inclusive, so that whatever collections we've got on our repositories are not just research and academic work, but it's also what communities have contributed. So I think there is an opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware that we're nearly out of time. I just wanted to think, if anyone get any of the panel get any reflections. The whole point of the whole notion of this week, the Global Scholarship Week, is around bridging the opens. The opens, and I think we've talked about OERs and open access long form. Does anyone get any sort of final reflections? I think about how, in terms of how we can bridge the opens and this work can contribute towards that. Was that too big a question for the last 2 minutes for you?
So I'd offer and say, for us with open science, a policy that has just recently been approved by cabinet, we see it as an opportunity for us to actually take the conversation of open access monographs to the next level. And we're trusting that there'll also be mandates that come from the Department of Higher Education and Training in support of that conversation. Thank you.
Anybody else on the panel want to just reflect on the bridging the opens issue?
Dominic, I think it's really important because it enables all of us to carry one another on a long journey, a long, complex journey. So by bridging the opens and communities of practice around the different opens, we can take heart from successes, whether that's an OER or open data, open journals, open books. We all are reminded that we are working in collaboration, in partnership together for the greater good, and it will take time, but it's worth doing, and we're not alone.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great way of ending it, Alicia. I think, and that's the whole point of this week and the point of having all your informed contributions on this panel. And what we want to do in the Knowledge Equity Network. So I'm just going to finish up. Just wanted to thank you all again for all your contributions. Thanks for all the contributions and the panelists and the attendees and the contributions in the chat. I think it's been a really interesting session, and for me, it's just so interesting learning from others and learning, learning from other experiences, especially outside of the UK. I just wanted to refer you to the final session about the co-creation session, which is a really interesting and quite innovative sort of part to this week as well, which is happening this afternoon. So hopefully you can all make that. But otherwise, thank you to all the panelists once more. Really appreciate your inputs, your thought leadership and your informed contributions. And thank you all for attending from wherever you are in the world, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.